When a crime is committed, the perpetrator inevitably leaves behind something, a description, DNA, or physical evidence. This is the criminal's print on the scene. Welcome to the Criminal Print Podcast, Episode 1.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Criminal Prints Podcast with your hosts Zach and Jaron. We're glad to have you. This is Zach. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. You might know me from the podcast Strange Cases podcast. I am a true crime fanatic. My interest came at a very early age, and I was very interested in the Titanic. It went from the Titanic to D.B. Cooper, to the Zodiac Killer, to what happened to Amelia Earhart's plane, and kept expanding from there. Another one that I was really interested in was the 1962 Escape from Alcatraz with Frank Morse, John and Clarence Anglin. What happened to them? Did they live? Did they die? Absolutely love it. My favorite TV shows growing up were, of course, Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted. I could have literally watched them all day, of course, if my parents would have let me. Growing up, I wanted to be a private investigator. I always wanted to do that because I wanted to have a role in helping some unsolved cases get solved. As I got older, it turned into I got big into the original Night Stalker Golden State Killer case. And I'm sure if you talk to anybody I was working with that day, I think it was just about a year ago, when he was identified, I could not stop smiling. It was absolutely a glorious day for me when they identified Joseph DeAngelo.
Yeah, and I'm Jaron, and I am Zach's brother, younger brother, so I grew up watching a lot of the same things and having a lot of the same interests because Zach was so interested in a lot of these things. I, for one, can attest how excited he was when they caught the Golden State Killer. That was some day, actually, very exciting. But so yeah, a few things about me. I also am into crime, maybe not quite to the extent Zach is. As he said, he is a bit of a fanatic, but I also enjoy classic cars, and I own one myself, and I love working on cars, and love sports, and a lot of just the normal things.
So one of my other personal favorites that I remember actually watching on Unsolved Mysteries is what we're going to talk about in our first episode today, and that is the disappearance of Angie Hammond. Angie was a nickname that she went by.
Yeah, this was one of the really crazy Unsolved Mystery episodes. I'm sure a lot of you guys will remember it. As we start talking about it, a lot of things will click. It was one of those, I'm sure Zach, you'll agree, that it was just one of those that was so strange and so memorable.
Absolutely. It was certainly one that even though I didn't watch it often, it's not like I'd seen that episode more than once. One time was enough to get it engraved in my memory.
Yeah, I probably haven't seen the episode for, 10 years, but even now I can remember some of the reenactments and some of the scenes. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess that's why that TV show left such a imprint on a lot of fanatics. The imagery, and it was very interesting. So we'll get into this case. We'll talk a little bit about Angie Hammond, and go ahead and kick us off, Zach.
All right. So she grew up in Clinton, Missouri. Her parents were divorced, but it was a happy upbringing. She had lots of friends. She was a very liked person.
Yeah, from all accounts, she really was really liked. Everybody loved her. Always had a smile on her face. And yeah, I never read or saw anything otherwise.
I agree.
So when she disappeared, or when this happened, she was 20 years old, right?
Yep.
And she worked at the Union State Bank. I don't know what her job description was, but if I were guessing, she was probably a teller or something of that nature. And she was taking classes at a local college.
Definitely. So I'll tell you a little bit about physical description of her. She was 4 foot 11 inches, 120 to 140 pounds. And at the time of her disappearance, she had on a white shirt with black spots, black slacks with white sneakers, and something distinctive of her, she had a scar on her upper lip.
Yeah, and to add to that, she was also 4 months pregnant. So, maybe at 4 months you could hide it, but not for much longer. It's kind of a distinctive thing.
Absolutely. And she also had brown hair and brown eyes.
Yeah, so Angela was engaged to Rob. Rob
Schaefer, I
Rob
believe is how
Schaefer.
you say it.
Yep, thank you. They had met the previous year in November 1990. They really hit it off. And a few months later, actually, in January of 91, she announced her pregnancy to Rob, who was very excited from the sounds of it. And he quickly proposed, and they started making plans for the future. And they even moved in together shortly after, so...
Definitely. And just a little bit about Rob. He was a high school athlete, and he was also, like Angie, a very well-liked individual, and everybody said very positive things about him.
Yeah, I guess he was in really good shape, and he was just a good-looking guy and just an all-American-looking guy. So, the night we're going to be focusing on, unfortunately, is April 4th, 1991, and that was the night that Angela was abducted. So she was in her hometown of Clinton, Missouri that night, but she didn't spend a lot of the day in that town. She was out of town, I think, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, but just 20, 30 miles out of town.
Correct.
At a barbecue with friends and family. And her and Rob left that barbecue at 9 p.m., so getting fairly late in the night, and they kind of split up because he had to babysit for his mother and babysit his younger brother, right?
Absolutely.
So they split up, and she went and hung out with her very best friend, Kyla, I believe is the name.
Yes, correct.
So they were from the account that was given, is that they cruised Main Street. Mm-hmm. So they were just cruising, having a good time. It was a very small town, Clinton, Missouri. So I'm sure that they saw, some people that they knew and were just kind of checking out what was going on.
Definitely. So when they split at 11:15, she went and she used a payphone at the Food Mart, the corner of the road, because her and Rob at the time didn't have the financial means to be able to afford a house phone. So she went and she was calling Rob to tell him that she was going home instead of meeting him back in town because they were going to meet back up.
Yeah, the plan was for them to meet up and basically have a night on the town and have a good time. And after her time with Kyla, she was just kind of tired and decided she was going to go home and take a bubble bath, I think is what was said, right?
Definitely.
So, unfortunately, during this phone call, which lasted about a half hour, so a pretty long phone call at a payphone, right?
Mm-hmm.
During this phone call, she noticed there was a old pickup truck circling the parking lot. And as he circled the parking lot, she got a little more and more worried about what was going on. And so she started talking to Rob about it.
Exactly. She actually started, because she was alarmed by it, she started kind of to give him a play-by-play, you would say. She started to describe this individual as a filthy, bearded man. He was wearing coveralls, a dark baseball hat, glasses, and he had a full beard and mustache. And so, one other thought here with the payphones, I mean, it's 2019. It's extremely difficult to find a payphone today, but in 1991, they were literally everywhere.
Yeah, they were just on almost every corner mart, everything had a payphone. So, and there were no cell phones, obviously. So the payphone was kind of your lifeline if you were just out, maybe couldn't make it home soon, and that's exactly this situation. She couldn't make it home as quick as she wanted, so she called Rob and let him know.
Exactly. So we know that as she was kind of a little bit uneasy by the situation, that this truck pulled up, and he pulled over and approached the phone booth that was by hers. So he actually returned to his truck, and he grabbed a flashlight and acted as if he was looking for something in the dark. So she, at this point, actually talked to the suspect and asked him, "Do you need to use a phone?" And he said no.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the next thing that Rob heard is just her screaming. And I haven't been able to find what she screamed. I think it was just a screaming in general, a panic scream, right?
I agree. Yeah, I don't recall any words actually being said, but just a scream. Correct.
So Rob, this is small town Clinton, Missouri. As of 2016, there's only 9,000 residents. So I imagine in 91, a smaller town. So he knew where she was. In fact, he was only 7 blocks away at his mother's house. So when he heard this scream, Rob, being a young, strong athlete, he just bolted. He ran to the car, and he jumped in the car and decided, I'm going to go find Angie.
Exactly. So he was going towards the phone booth, and he saw a truck matching the description with a visible struggle between the driver and the passenger. And he actually saw Angela stick her head out the window and scream, "Robbie."
Boy, how bone-chilling is that, right?
Ooh, creepy.
The last thing you hear your fiancé say is your name while you're trying to reach her and she's in trouble.
Absolutely.
So Robbie instinctually threw his car in reverse and performed a U-turn. And unfortunately, there was unintended consequences from that U-turn, and he didn't realize that till a couple miles later when performing a right-hand turn following this truck. His transmission gave out completely, and the car was totally inoperable.
Exactly. So, I mean, Lord help that anybody is never in this situation again, but I'm sure all the adrenaline going through, and he just didn't think about it. And I'm sure it'd be very easy to do, but he just stuck it straight into reverse, didn't slow down, didn't hit the brakes, and it damaged and ruined the transmission. And what a horrible, horrible situation that is.
Yeah, and he did give chase at that point on foot, it sounds like, but obviously it just faded into the distance, and the truck he was going after was gone.
Exactly. The lights just slowly faded away.
Yeah, so he knew at that point he had to get back to town, and he had to talk to the police. Luckily, he was picked up by a motorist and taken to the police station, where he arrived just past midnight.
So at this point, where the case stands, he goes to the police station, and I mean, as you can imagine, this is a very unique, to be honest, kind of hard to believe story for the police.
Yeah, the story just sounds, as Rob would tell it, it would sound very contrived and just, I mean, ridiculous, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say, but yeah, it would be like, what happened? And go over this again?
Yeah, where'd you pull this from, a movie? It's just too convenient, too strange. And what was his alibi really? He was babysitting his little brother. That's not much of an alibi.
Exactly. So we know that the police at this point are considering Rob the only suspect. So Rob gives them a sketch of the individual that he saw in the truck.
Yeah. So let's talk about that sketch just for a minute here. The sketch ended up being of a man, a pretty ordinary looking man with no facial hair and long hair, right?
Correct. Which is really weird because Angela on the phone described this individual as a filthy bearded man.
Yeah, and it's really strange because he was the one that relayed this information from Angela. So for his sketch to not have facial hair is really strange. And I'll tell you what, I have to wonder if it was possible that it was a disguise of some type and it got taken off between her being abducted and him seeing the driver.
That's actually a very good point. I could see that for sure.
But it was very controversial at the time that, the sketch did not match the description, which is obviously really strange.
Definitely. So we know that the truck was a late 60s or early model 70s green F-150 Ford.
Yeah, and there was some unique things about that truck. If you want to just go ahead and talk about some of those.
So I've seen a few different things about the truck. One said that it had a outdoors decal covering the whole back window.
Yeah, the whole back window, and I've seen descriptions more often than not, in fact, that there was also a fish jumping out of the water in the middle of that decal.
That's the one I've seen most also.
Yeah, so that's a pretty unique deal. I've also seen some people talk about, yes, the truck was green, and it also had a white top. It was really common Ford, a lot of the Fords back then kind of were two paints, an upper and a lower paint scheme.
Exactly.
So it's very possible that it was a green and white truck. I'm not entirely sure, and it looks like maybe they got differing accounts on that.
Definitely.
So at this point, the only suspect was Rob Schaefer. And like Zach said, they were very skeptical of his accounts because it's just too ridiculous. But the thing is they started to kind of look into the case. They found his car in the middle of the road, and it was indeed out of operation.
And they even tried it to just verify that the transmission was out, which it was.
Yeah, and it was dead. So that obviously lends his story a hand.
Absolutely. And her car was found in the parking lot. It still had her purse inside. And it later came out that two witnesses had told police that they saw a truck matching the description of this F-150 in the area around the time of her disappearance.
Yeah, and to add to that, he even did a polygraph, which this is pre-DNA, so really all you could do was a polygraph outside of real evidence. So he did that and he passed.
Exactly. So then at this point, police are connecting the dots, realizing that as incredible as this story sounds, it's legit. And he's ruled out from being a suspect.
Yeah, and that took a full week, I believe. He was the prime suspect in his fiance's disappearance for a week.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah, that's really tough, but you can understand how it would happen. There just was nobody else.
Oh, certainly.
But they did get together, friends and family, and try to figure out if there was any issues at home or any problems, and all they found was an ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, so the ex-boyfriend is Bill Barker, and small town rumors fly. And it was rumored that he was the father of Angie's baby, which clearly was not true and he denied. And so, maybe Rob did something out of anger because of this. But after it was further investigated, it was ruled as not being true and completely ruled out.
Yeah, so at this point, there were no suspects because Rob and Bill had both been ruled out. And so while this is going on, obviously they launched a huge search, right? Lots of volunteers. It sounds like a huge part of the community volunteered to try to find Angie. Obviously police, friends, family, and they didn't find anything.
No, unfortunately, they didn't find anything. In fact, the Missouri Highway Patrol searched a list of 1,600 trucks, but were not able to find anything
that matched that.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, and it's tough because Missouri's a farm community. That area is a farm community, and it sounds like they searched wells, they searched rivers, they searched abandoned, buildings and barns, and they found nothing.
Definitely. So the one thing they were going off of that they looked at later was a possible connection to other crimes. And this other crime was a disappearance of Trudy Darby, and that was on January 19th, 1991.
So it fits right in that same time zone.
Exactly, and the MO fits.
Yeah, so she was found. She was actually found, which is one of the differences in the case. But her disappearance was it was late at night, not quite as late, but it was 10 o'clock, and I believe that it was outside of a convenience store or a grocery store, something similar.
Correct.
And so that's obviously is very similar and that's similar to another disappearance that they also thought could be connected in February 27th of 91, so 1 month later, of Cheryl Ann Kennedy, right?
Absolutely. And that similar thing, MO was similar. She disappeared. She was actually going to have her son, because she was afraid to go outside by herself, so she was going to have her son go there and meet her, which he did. Unfortunately, by the time the son got there, his mom was already gone.
Yeah, and on top of that, 3 years later in 1994, the first case that we were talking, Trudy Darby, they solved that case, and it turned out to be a couple half brothers. One was named Jesse Rush, and the other Marvin Cheney. They were convicted, and they were sent to prison for their crimes of raping and murdering Trudy. It did get a little interesting in that Jesse wrote from jail. He wrote a letter claiming to have raped and murdered other women.
So this definitely set off alarms, but they were pretty young at this time. They weren't.
They were 15 at the time of the Trudy Darby crime.
Exactly.
And it was two of them. So the odds of them committing a crime alone, it doesn't look like that's...
Yeah, because from everything we've been told about the Angela Hammond disappearance, it was a single individual that kidnapped her.
Yeah, and you know, they obviously you could wear a disguise or whatever, but it sounded like it was kind of a old man or older man with a beard and mustache driving a truck, and just
Exactly.
It didn't fit a 15-year-old kid.
No, I would say, just my personal opinion, middle-aged man.
Yeah. So that's really all they had was the problem, and there was nobody else to look to. So in 2009, the Clinton PD actually talked a little more about this, and they released what looked like it could be bombshell information, right?
Absolutely. So in 2009, the Clinton PD claimed to have possible DNA evidence. Now, we know with DNA evidence that it has advanced immensely in recent years. For example, as we talked about a little bit before, Joseph DeAngelo and the Golden State Killer case. So all the cold cases that are currently being solved in the country, it's huge. Now, unfortunately, this is the last information we have been told about the DNA evidence, so we don't know anything about what came from it.
Yeah, it's been about a decade, and there's been no other announcements. So it looks as if maybe the DNA evidence either didn't pan out, or thus far just hasn't got a suspect.
For sure. One other thing, we know that with DNA, I mean, up until recently, especially in 2009, even if you have DNA, you still had to have a suspect to compare it to.
Yeah.
So you've got the DNA, but, you know, now we know that they can go through GEDmatch and do kind of the family tree and get it to a specific person and narrow it down. But in 2009, this was flat out unheard of.
Yeah, and you just have to wonder if the profile would be as complete in 2009.
Exactly.
So I guess the only option there is to kind of wait it out and hope that they can run the DNA again and maybe get more in the future.
Oh, certainly. I hope so.
So let's talk a little bit more about really the only piece of, and it's not even physical evidence, but the truck. That's really all there is in this case to link the crime to the criminal, right?
Definitely. So the truck is extremely intriguing because at the time the police actually thought, hey man, this is a closed case. We got a specific description of the truck. It's got a decal that covers a whole back window. We'll be able to find this. He got a partial plate, so they were extremely confident that they would find it. Unfortunately, that has not panned out, but we know that from the description, the two-tone, the decal, we also know that this individual was well aware that he was being followed.
Yeah, he knew he was followed for 2 miles, it sounds like.
Yes.
And it would have been really aggressively. So, unfortunately, I think that also would mean he knows he has to either get rid of the truck or hide the truck's identity. Would you say that's accurate?
I agree. And just a few things that come to my mind is, A, he could have repainted it.
Yeah.
Which is certainly an option, because it's not like they had the VIN number. They just had the description of it.
Yeah.
Another one that kind of comes to my mind is he could have just completely made it disappear, chopped it up.
Yep. Yeah, he could have easily just chopped it up and the truck's gone, right?
Exactly.
Or maybe even parked it in a lake.
I agree completely. Could have made it just disappear.
Yep. And so, unfortunately, maybe him following the man in the truck kind of was a bad thing in a way, right? Because now he knew, I got to get this truck out of sight.
Exactly. And I'm sure one of the first things he did is realized, hey, this decal has got to go immediately.
Yeah, that decal probably wouldn't have made it through the night or through the next day, and he would have had it gone.
And unfortunately for this case, that decal is probably the biggest piece of evidence they had.
Yeah, that would have been, unfortunately, just about it for the evidence, is this truck and this decal, and it did have some damage on it as well.
It did. The front fender, Rob said, had some damage to it.
Yeah, but, you just, it's very unfortunate, and you figure that most likely the truck is gone. There were some sightings of her afterwards, which is really common in cases like this, right?
Exactly.
So, they did search. They looked into especially a sighting of her in Canada, which led nowhere.
Unfortunately.
And there were kind of sightings of her here and there, and none of them ever led anywhere.
Exactly. So I'll give a little bit of my thoughts here. So in my opinion, the scumbag that abducted her was from out of town, because it was a small town and multiple people, the witnesses that saw the truck, said that they'd never seen the truck before or the individual that was driving it. So I think that he was an out-of-towner. Unfortunately, he was there just to cause havoc, abducted her, and in my opinion at least, immediately got out of town.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you on this. It does sound like it was a small town. The witnesses felt like that if he was from around there, they would have known him, and they didn't. And so, yeah, it does sound like he came to town with I don't know, maybe fishing. It was April. Maybe fishing
Absolutely.
trip. Who knows? But whatever it was, I don't think he was from there. He just showed up, caused problems, and was gone. And most likely that truck was gone within a week. And all leads are gone at that point.
I agree. And it's so sad to see a case that you would think could and should be solved go unsolved for this many years. So that is the case of Angie Hammond. We appreciate you listening to us. We have a Twitter page and a Facebook page. We'd love you to check it out. Please tell us about your friends. We love feedback. And thank you very much for listening to us. And that is the first episode of Criminal Prince Podcast.